So I'm going to start with a personal epiphany that I had a few weeks ago. I was with the CEO of a large real estate fund in India recently, and he rattled off the names of the many architects designing the flagship projects for the fund. Having not heard a single Indian name there, I wondered, why was the case so? And the question obviously followed that why don't you hire Indian architects to do large projects here in India? His answer has led to the conversation that we're all going to have today. I know how hard it is to build a brand, to build a business, while being very mindful of good design, relevant design, and what is pertinent to the country today. I mean, the panel before us pretty much laid out the precedent actually for this panel. So I'm looking forward to this dialogue with, of course, Ranjeet, who's a custodian of a global brand that has not only survived but thrived in India, and two visionaries of Indian architecture, or in a very, very dynamic industry where we are ingrained and rooted in design, confronted with a lot of outflow of content, and the world is extremely cluttered, today when it comes to design. It can often be misconstrued. It needs continuous reinterpretation. There are challenges of sustainability, of craft, of heritage, of saving the old, of progressing, using technology. And practice becomes challenging. And as a result, mindful design often gets ignored. So before we take the conversation forward, what we thought we'll do is we'll have the personal point of view for each of our speakers here. We'll start with Ranjeet, we'll move on to Akshat, and then Puran, and then we'll move ahead with the questions for the panel. So Ranjeet, we'll start with your presentation first.
Okay, thank you so much. We're going to try a slightly different format this time, so we have a few slides on the deck. The only reason I have some slides here is because I want to justify sharing the stage with Puran and Akshat, who are going to give us a lot more deeper insight into this topic. But I just want to justify me being here on the stage. So I'm just going to go through what we feel from a Kohler point of view is mindful design in this changing world. It ties very closely to being aware of well-being, sustainability, and technology, and bringing that together. For us, our mission has changed, and we were, for 150 years, we used to talk about improving and delivering more gracious living to our consumers. That's something that the founders have done right from the start. What we've added now to this is healthy and sustainable living. And so this is one of the pieces that goes into our framework of deciding how we design our products. And being mindful, what we want to do is that we want to make sure that we are connecting a lot more to our consumers, trying to figure out how their well-being it gets incorporated into our design. How does sustainability get incorporated into the design? That's something that as a company we're trying to do. From day one, back in 1873, when the company was set up, and it got set up because of our founder looking at trying to deliver a more gracious living to the consumers around there, converting a horse trough into a bathtub, which is what started the journey to say, hey, we can actually deliver a product that is going to make a meaningful difference to our consumer. And since then, we've seen the journey traverse every single year, picking up stuff that is a lot more relevant. So now there are trends around the globe looking at the consumers, looking at well-being. The product that you see on the screen is a Kohler ice bath. This is something new which is now making the rounds. We want to play a very, very strong role in ensuring that our technology delivers on this concept of well-being. If you look at design and technology coming together, in fact, the last year at this show itself, we had launched this product, Numi 2.0. It talks about making sure that we have immersive experiences that bring together technology and make sure that is the interaction with the consumer enables mindful presence of our products in the consumer homes. Another product that now we are moving into, which is from a wellness and beauty space, again, a product designed right here in India. In fact, the team that designed the product is sitting right here. Take a bow, guys. It was fantastic to see that India is now stepping up to say that we'll get into not just kitchen and bath, but get into grooming, health, wellness, beauty, with integrated design coming in. So this is a lab which is integrated with a steam solution, something that consumers in India are now looking at from a grooming space. At the same time, sustainability becomes an important aspect. So as we get into our conversations around design, we are looking at low flow products that are still delivering great consumer value, and at the same time are delivering significant impact on the sustainability agenda. So for us, for example, we are targeting, without an additional price, how do we target a low flow product delivery? I mean, this product that we are now launching, and we are going to have this platform across all our products, actually lands up saving 12,000 liters of water per bathroom a year. I have a personal target of saving 500 million liters of water through sale of Kohler products in India just this year, moving that up to about 2 billion liters of water in 2029. And this is something that we need to incorporate upfront in our design so that we don't have to worry about what is the impact that we are causing downstream. The other piece is sustainable and responsible design. Our Waste Labs initiative actually looks at the entire value chain of wherever waste is generated and convert that into, again, beautiful design, whether it is tiles, whether it is a sink that you see there, which is completely made from product that is waste that is produced throughout our value chain to make a meaningful difference. And of course, for us, mindful design also means respecting local context. This is a product called Killer, which incorporates Indian design into a category which is otherwise considered as bland and boring. For us, as we move forward, this is something that we want to continue doing. We want to make sure that mindful design is something that we incorporate into every single product that we are kind of taking forward. We do believe that India has the design flex to be able to actually show to the globe what we can put forward as future designs. That's one of the pieces that is most exciting for me as we get into this entire cycle. So that's all I wanted to share, a quick idea about products and also how we are thinking about mindful design as a company. Thank you.
Ranjeet, we'll now have Akshat, whose presentation is going to come up now, I think.
So when I came back to India in 2002, we were already talking about population projections and where we will be by 2035. What will happen to our urban environments and how hostile they will actually be given the current development paradigms. Historically, architecture was meant to perform and emote. Given the burgeoning population, there is really no space to accommodate urban development without actually taking away from forests and green cover. And as architects, we tend to discuss how we engage our projects in sustainable development without actually thinking much about patterns of consumption, because the practice of architecture is different from the business of architecture. And I think the greatest challenge lies there. How do you make stuff that lasts 100 years and remains relevant for that duration? So we approach our practice from a few different dimensions. None of these dimensions are actually pure. And I think we consider ourselves today guerrilla warriors because we feel that for the revolutions that need to take place in the built environment to save what's left of our world, we need architecture to really speed up. And unfortunately, most development takes a lot of time. Any meaningful commission in architecture is at least 4 to 7 years, and that should answer part of your question when you started this. So one of our approaches is to actually regenerate older buildings, right? So the most sustainable project is one that actually exists. The previous slide was a snippet from the Jodhpur urban redevelopment project, where we took what was actually a dump, and we took all the sludge and debris out of it to find a step well. The step well became a regenerating aquifer and it became an urban environment. And that then became a catalyst for a much larger urban project for the old city. We also did a project recently where we used waste containers. This happened during COVID, when the Delhi government was challenged with how to make many mohalla clinics. So we refashioned old discarded shipping containers, because shipping containers have certain performance criteria, and we did a small urban study to say which nodes are actually most important to sort of position the mohalla clinics so people can read them, understand what's going on, spread the message, and then what should the icon actually be. The mohalla clinics project then has now become, it was for the former Delhi government a sort of icon, and a few other governments of different states and countries have now taken it on. So this is just reusing post-industrial waste. Because what you actually want is for your work to be socially relevant. You need it to not just be sterile, but you also need to sort of weave a much larger atmosphere and create something that's across spectrum. I think often when we're taught in architecture school, you're taught to work for the lowest common denominator. You're not actually, or the lowest possible client, because that's your largest client base. Unfortunately, that's never your client base directly. That's always your client base indirectly. So you need to work for a developer or through government. And when you're in those spaces, you really need to know how you're going to create a significant mark, because what the common man desires as architecture actually, or aspires for their architecture to be, is actually high performance in an interior space. That's where you spend most of your time. So we also do a lot of five-star work. This is one of the oldest hotels in the country. It's the Grand Calcutta at Oberoi, where it's the Oberoi Grand at Kolkata. And that's, we sort of hacked and cut this building while preserving the old terracotta slabs. We punched in a new skylight and, just basically wanted to give the project a new lease of life while preserving its built heritage and reminding people of all the polyrhythms that actually exist within the space. We extended that same idea to reusing and controlling buildings. This is a townhouse project in London where we actually took abandoned small guest houses, converted them into Oyos, and so that they have a slightly snazzier, cooler, younger feel, and they become a relevant part of the city. For us, it was also a little bit of urban cleanup by subterfuge, because you would clean up and uniform the facade, but you'd also ask them, it was part of our deal with them to say, will you also clean up the street? Will you start cleaning every street that you're on? And they happily agreed. This was the pilot project that was then brought into India, and you may have seen some of these in our cities. But you need to do this. You need to do this in a manner that is not discriminatory. So it's not like we're looking for a building with a special history or special heritage, but you take any building that would otherwise just be forgotten. This is a workspace that we built in Goa, where this was a nondescript industrial unit, which was then refashioned as a workspace for a logistics company. And we've, of course, extended slab. What it does for us is it minimizes the amount we have to build. It reduces, it essentially just gives us another couple of decades on an infrastructure that already exists. A similar project in Delhi, close by, in Okhla. And all with the intention of actually working with principles that sort of engage the user and make you realize that the physics of building is actually the more exciting part of building. It's not necessarily only the narrative of a building. And for this, we root every principle, be it an old project or a new project, firmly in the principles of British high-tech, which is resource optimization, reduction, clarity of communication, essentially rooted in the 5 principles of modernism. This is a project called the Discovery Center in Bangalore, where we used earth air tunnels and we developed a whole new air conditioning system to create 100% fresh air and ventilated building. The entire ventilation system happens through the glazing or the glass skin of the building, all while creating an architecture that is worthy of being called a town hall. Now, this building is 105 meters long, it's 17 meters wide. It was built in 8 months. So one of the challenges that we're trying to overcome with a modular approach and an approach for recyclability and long lifespan dry materials is to actually change the pace at which we can create larger projects. We tried it for a hotel, which was one of our first projects here, where we used material stone found at the site to make a 200,000 square foot hotel project, a lot of which was underground, on a reclaimed riverbed. And this hotel was built in about 14 months. And that's the mass timber project that people are talking about these days. So mass timber is a material that actually sequesters carbon. We realized that, in order to have an architecturally sustainable impact, we're running so far back or so far behind our population and consumption explosion that we actually need to start absorbing carbon through our work and not just talk about maintaining status quo. So this was a completely modular building made in Goa. It took 4 months to construct above the foundations. And we worked with a company to develop the mass timber technology. Unfortunately, Indian forests are still not sustainably farmed and not controlled farmed. So we had to import the timber from Canada, but even then, the carbon cycle works out. And you can basically put it together, you can put a timber structure together like a kit of parts. The span on this structure is 9 meters and the height's also about 9 meters. And finally, we're doing a 35-acre forest regeneration project, which is extending the Rajaji forest. Again, the buildings are modular. They take and sit in one of the harshest natural environments, because every time you're next to a river, you're dealing with a lot of natural forces, but you're also dealing with extreme heat. So building this forest and sort of reclaiming land that has been destroyed through rampant agriculture is an attempt to actually start giving back. So while we create high value, each one of these villas is now monitored by a couple of universities to see how their carbon footprint actually manifests and what the community does, but it's actually a cohabitation project where people will not just live with forest-like trees, but they'll also be surrounded with wild animals. And of course, everything that we've learned over the last decade and a half for building in architecture and building modular, building through with a systems-driven approach is what this project demonstrates. Thank you.
Thank you. Puran, I think your presentation is going to be next.
Hi. Tanya, so I'm going to go back to where you started. You talked about scale. You talked about why Indian architects are not working on international real estate funds building in India. I don't think that's my focus. My focus is not scale. My focus is not volume. My focus is mindfulness. I think that's what we are talking about today, being mindful about the design that we take on. It could be a small project. It could just be a product. It could just be an interior space or a very modest villa or a design lab. It could be anything that we touch as architects, as designers, and how mindful are we about what we are doing. I think mindfulness includes a lot of things. It talks about climate. It talks about culture of the place, being rooted in heritage, being rooted in the context, being aware of what my natural resources are, where is it the local resources are coming from, how mindful am I of making sure that I am not abusing as architects are known to abuse. So some of the things that we do see across the world being architects, we're very aware of urban regeneration, we are aware of how impact is created. There's a certain process each one of us has. As we start designing, something goes on in our heads and we want to start sketching, we want to start the process of conceptualizing. I think that's where the mindfulness begins. To me, being aware of what my role, what my responsibility as an architect is where it begins. It doesn't begin with the brief. The brief is what the client puts on the table and says, hey, listen, you're commissioned for this. So some of the case studies possibly in the residential sector, everybody knows this. Everybody knows the contextual brilliance of the project and its mindfulness over a century ago. Bawa and Kandalama in Sri Lanka have experienced this property. As you're there, you understand the engagement that the architect has had with the entire process of not just conceptualizing and designing it, but executing every single detail. I think a whole lot of mindfulness is in the detail, which is where, as practices that are evolving, and I think that was one of the premise that Misha and thank you, Misha, by the way, in case you're here. Misha and Tanya talked about that we need to talk about evolving practices in design which look at every aspect very sensitively. So a simple process, you can take, make, and waste, and you can build. The building lives its life, and you can go on with it. Or maybe we could look at refurbish, retain, reuse, reclaim, recycle, refit. And there's a cyclical aspect to design, and you can try and see how heritage could find its due. Heritage could possibly find its space under the sun, and we don't have a loop that needs to be opened. It can be closed out with that. Some of the case studies closer to home in the community sector, we have the Ice Factory by Kamal Malik and Arjun Malik. I wanted to just show these visuals so you understand that it's not just our works that we are relating about over here. We're talking about design in international context, in Indian context, that's very mindful of the whole sense of, also Mr. Bhatt, who's here. Coincidentally, he's shown this project already. So the Jodhpur step wells, and I've recently been to Jodhpur 3 months back. I was talking to Ambrish also, who's done a brilliant job there with RAS and the adjoining step well. So I think architecture, its very significance in the cultural and the community fabric of life needs its respect. It needs its due, which as architects or people responsible for design have as a basic responsibility towards that. We do some of the work which is oriented towards that as Studio PKA. We have a studio in Fort, Mumbai, which is in the art district, the heritage district of Old Bombay City. Explorations through contextual and adaptive responses is somewhere that the studio is recognized as that. Some of the projects that I want to talk about. So to us, being responsible about design is being contextual, being very sensitive towards the environment, be it the landscape, the green, local materials, local sources. This is a villa in Alibag, a project that is come to be known as a vernacular intervention in architecture of the near urban kind. Or another project which is sitting on a water body near Bombay, near Pavna Lake, has its context set. There's a dam and 2 forts, and there's a water body which is the largest man-made water body in India. And we have the site sitting on top of that. And we try to respond in our own way in a very sensible, in a very sensitive fashion to something like that. Or a design lab that we've designed in Alibag, which has the inside-outside connect, the very environment setting, which is so critical for architecture to respect when we get sites like this. Coming back to the adaptive reuse aspect in architecture, it's not just the build, it's what we are trying to restore. The building in Fort, where we found home 7-8 years ago and created the loft, our studio, our first studio, which had the whole weave of the old architecture, of the layers that were peeled, and we tried to see what we could discover as the heritage, the glory of the heritage that existed. And a few years later, 5 years later, this is our studio now, where we have redefined that space by adaptively reusing the space and also reusing the material, which is a sustainability for us as an aspect that we care for. A similar thing in Ballard State, another commercial district in Bombay, has this retail store, a lifestyle store that has just revived life for designers and retail customers alike, where it's just about discovering spaces. Going on to urban regeneration of spaces in a similar setting in Ballard State, where we recently spoke about this and had a walk during Kalagoda Festival in Bombay last month. And we have these trapped courtyards, which are public spaces, rightfully ours, and they're not being looked into, they are being disrespected. So some of these areas give us enough insight into what we like to do as architects and designers, where we could just put everything together in one bag as people, as professionals, as sensitive human beings, to try and see how design can cater to not only build, reutilize, but also reuse, adaptively reuse everything that we find around us. Thank you.
Thank you. Then it was really nice to see actually the case studies. So thank you for highlighting that aspect. So
Thank you.
I'll straight away move up to the questions, right? I will start with Ranjeet very quickly. Kohler's had the benefit, being a global brand. There's a lot of structure, systems, process, right? That enable, that become the backbone of what makes a creative brand, which obviously helps in being mindful. Do you think this is an advantage that a creative brand and a design practice should have?
So I think I see it as an advantage if it is a deliberate strategy from the top to say that this is what our end goal needs to be. It can actually become a disadvantage if it becomes too restrictive in terms of a set process. And so fine balance has to be taken. I think the advantage that we get just as a company is that starting from David Kohler, who's now fourth generation entrepreneur running this business, he's personally also extremely involved in the entire design process. I mean, we have an opportunity to be able to discuss with him design elements at a very regular frequency. So there's a good, solid system in place for us to be able to actually drive that particular creativity. So it's almost like a freedom within a framework. So the framework helps. More importantly, the investment helps. And investment both in terms of the resources that are being put, but also the time that is spent. And I think the selection criteria of what will be okay design is also very well known within the system. I think that really helps.
Thanks. Akshat, my next question is for you. You've built your practice from ground up. You've had the opportunity to also use technology right from the early days of your practice. Do you think that technology plays a definitive role in shaping mindful design? Do you think it's an added advantage?
I think technology is available universally. Technology can be used or abused. It's how you use it. It's how clear you are about why you want to use something in a particular manner, and that eventually is technique, right? Technique is deeply personal. So when I refer to technology in work, it's not about the various systems that go in place to make a space more fidgety or friendly, but it's actually about the bones that go into actually creating structure and creating space. Brick is also part of a technology, right? Now you have various techniques with which you can use it. The same applies for steel or carbon fiber and such. We've had the privilege of using it because we pushed for it, because we've always pushed for new building physics. Because I don't believe India can continue to rely, I mean, we are a fairly dense mass, so we can't continue to rely on voluminous thermal mass. We'll need to find ways to create that same level of performance and find expression with thinner skins and with lighter, faster, easier buildable frameworks.
Interesting. Puran, India, I mean, I think all of us have spoken about it. India will build a lot, billions of square foot in the next few decades. And a lot of the building will actually happen at the lower end of the spectrum, the stuff that will shape our cities today. How do you think adaptive reuse, and you've done a lot of work in that segment, how do you think adaptive reuse plays a role here?
I think, as I said, as architects, we believe that it's our responsibility to build and build sensibly. But I'm just saying stop. For a second, just stop, look around you and see if there is something already existing that has potential to be reused. I'm not saying we can't build, we can, and there are enough greenfield projects that Indian architects are engaged in. Our sensibility is also fairly oriented towards reusing what we have around us. And there's some brilliant architecture, brilliant buildings that we have around us, which are lying wasted, which are lying defunct. Take the case of Bombay, for example, in the city that we practice in. There's a lot of period architecture or Victorian architecture, which is there for a century and more. We are in a 115-year-old building. We came in there when it was almost 110 years of age, and it was falling apart. Nobody had the time of the day to look at an old building that had been deserted 50, 60, 70 years ago. And there were floors and spaces lying doing nothing. And the kind of glory, Tanya, the sort of glory that lay underneath that is there to be seen. We've done those projects. They've been spoken internationally about how, and there are similar projects in London and Paris and Milan, where, of course, more than us, there's a bit of more sensitivity towards architecture over there. But we're trying to do that little bit by our own, in our own way, by our own means in the cities in India. And I feel that if there is that sensitivity towards a certain heritage, a certain quality of architecture that we don't need to build to enjoy, but we can recreate by way of engaging with it, by way of some passion, some love towards spaces that we see, and patience, of course. Patience is a virtue that most architects don't have. We just go and build. But we feel that there is a different way of looking at it. And the world over now, the adaptive reuse as a work, as a body, as a doctrine has been looked at and appreciated, especially since we are living in the 21st century, which is going nowhere, which is only going one way. Let's just put it away. It is going somewhere, but it's only going one way. We are deforesting, as Akshat said. We are not very conscious about how we are maintaining the green cover and how we're keeping the carbon footprint low. So our endeavor towards adaptively reusing usable architecture spaces is something that we're very, very invested in.
Yeah, in fact, I think adaptive reuse is probably the key ways in which we can actually reimagine and protect our heritage. I think it's the first step,
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's
Absolutely.
really, and like I said, I think the first panel really set out the precedent right for this conversation.
Right.
Akshat, I'll come back to you actually. Creating and shaping experiences, is also a very important part of culture and mindful design. How do you think architects and designers, amidst the many challenges of context, culture, geography, climatic change, and many things, how does one be mindful of experiences?
That's a simulation in practice, but I think what you have to look to do is set up dialogues for future, right? You have to set up spaces that may be in between buildings or within buildings for enough conversation, which happens naturally, right? So it's not about us coming together for a forum. It's about the dialogue being extended in everyday life, right? When the sea change was happening in London at the turn of the century, architecture and urban design was everyday conversation in the metro. It was, they were discussing not private residences, they were discussing public buildings. They were up in arms against some architects, and they admired some architects who were championing certain causes, right? And I think it was that outreach. We are still afraid to work with the government. Most of us are. Most of us are afraid to lose money, lose time, lose respect. We hold on to our ideas too strong. We're not open to criticism. As a community at large, we're not open to criticism, knowing that somebody else should. And I think it's very important to find, to create a platform, be it physical space, urban space, or where people can disagree with each other. It's not important for everybody to be agreeable, right? And I think that's the problem in the world of design today. We're all, and I only mean that for the design of the built environment, right? We're all just too agreeable and too polite.
I agree with him.
Yeah, and we all need to talk about, I think, architecture and design a lot more to non-architects and non-designers, right? I think and India Design obviously is a great way where everybody from the city has come in, across the country, actually globally we've had, but more importantly, the fact that we are talking to people outside of the design fraternity is what is going to pave the way for this.
I think
Yeah.
just to further that point, each one of us has a role there. I think we all have to do it consciously.
Absolutely.
I, at my level, don't just talk to architects. A lot of people who are interested in design and architecture, a lot of friends of mine or people you come across, students from various walks, you try and educate them on architecture and design, or at least have an exchange with them and not just keep talking to people who are already working towards that. So I think that's a very pertinent point. In order to have a pertinent subjectivity in the society, there needs to be subjectivity. As he said, there needs to be conflict.
Yeah, so when somebody writes, I mean, in my practice, if somebody writes on a building, I tell them to actually go show it to some family member who's not an architect. Let them
Exactly.
read it, let them make sense of it. Because that's when you really start speaking a language that is going to be understood, and that is being mindful. Because, I mean, otherwise we're living in a closed bubble. Anyways, I'll come back to Ranjeet, sustainability, the buzzword, the much abused word today. And being mindful go hand in hand. How do global brands such as yours, how do you challenge? I mean, there is an intrinsic carbon cost to whatever you're doing. How are you addressing this challenge moving forward? Because I mean, a lot of the work that you showed actually was really interesting, how to save water, and you start at the root, at the grassroots level.
So I think, like most of the companies now that are aware, we have our sustainability goals. By 2035, we want to be net zero emission. But what is more exciting for me in terms of what we do at Kohler is to push the innovation cycle to say that without having an incremental pricing, consumer pricing attached to it, how do we make sure that the products are designed in a way that they add to the overall sustainability agenda? I think that's one piece that really drives us, which is what I shared in my earlier slide, so I won't repeat that. The second piece that I'm most excited about is to actually make this a language amongst all the people in the organization. This is something we tend to miss. I mean, I'll give you a very simple example. This year, I mean, we just celebrated last year, and we celebrated something called as Water Champions. What we are saying is that we are actually attaching the number of liters of water that every individual, from the sales, from the marketing, from people in the region, what are they delivering in terms of actual saving? And make it real, make that conversation real. At the end of the month, if I am an individual, I'm a salesperson somewhere in Guntur, and I'm told that because of what I did, 2 Olympic-sized swimming pool worth of water has got saved and not wasted. It becomes meaningful to me. I think the conversation on sustainability needs to become a little more demystified. A lot of people actually, the moment they start talking sustainability, half the people switch off because you don't understand the terms. You make it a little more real, and then everybody within the organization steps up and says, hey, this is genuinely something I can see a change on. And I think the talent in India, one of the pieces that I've seen is that once you make it clear to them about what is the impact that they're creating, they step up like nobody else. It's probably the only place where people will come to you and say, why was I not put onto this project? Most of the other parts of the world I've worked in, if you tell them, here is a project, they say, what should I stop working on? Right? India is probably one of the unique places where they'll be sulking if you were not picked up for a project, because it is meaningful. So make it meaningful, make sustainability a meaningful conversation in everyday life, and then magic will happen. I think that's the way I look
Yeah,
at
and
it.
I loved it when you said earlier when you were presenting that, your personal goal is to save that much water. And I think that's really how we need to start. And so thank you. So I'm going to take it from there. I mean, Ranjeet has said his personal sort of, as a brand, and of course, his personal goals for being mindful and the brand's goals for being mindful. Puran and Akshat, if you can have the last words and tell us, how do you think, as architects of the future who are shaping the world today, buildings are very, very complex animals, right? What can we do to create a better world, to create a more mindful experience, and to really make design be very, very impactful?
Clean it up so that you can think clearly when you're in a space. Create a space that allows you to feel content with what's around you and not sort of urging to find more. So what we try and do here is find enough natural light, give you enough volume for most part of your day. So your circadian rhythm is sort of aligned, and you're generally you generally have a more positive outlook in your mind and body rhythm. It's actually very simple to achieve. I think sustainability, like he said, can be demystified if you just look at it as a very simple approach. Right? Consume less and do more with what you have. Create systems not for complexity, but create systems for clarity.
Well, for me, it's, I think, an age-old policy, the KISS policy. Keep it simple, silly. Just keep it simple. I think we need to be on the same page as Ranjeet's talked about, as Akshat's talked about. It's accountability. We matter. Each one of us matters. So if each one of us is accountable for what we're doing, I think somewhere there's a progress. Sensitivity. To me, being sensitive towards your environment and your surrounding is extremely, extremely important. When I'm standing on the hill, which has got a greenfield project for me, I am sensitive towards what I see around me, what I feel around me as smell and sense. And the same in a very old structure or in a public space which has been lying for decades, being disrespected. So the sensitivity and the orientation towards what we're seeing around is important. So I think accountability and sensitivity are some of the things that come to my mind, and keeping it simple, not just trying to do too much. We'll get there.
Thank you. And we'll end with that. We will also keep it very, very simple. So thank you. Thank you, Ranjeet. Thank you, Akshat. And thank you, Puran, for sharing your work and your thoughts with us. Thank you.